In the harsh territories of 1870s New Mexico, the governor's stone mansion stands like a fortress against the desert wind. Behind its thick walls, Sarah Mitchell remains captive, a schoolteacher whose only crime was defending Apache children's right to learn. Outside, beneath the vast starlit sky, Thomas Running Eagle reads the night winds like others read books. A scout whose loyalty to neither tribe nor territory outweighs his sense of justice. As moonlight spills across adobe walls and sage-scented paths, their fates intertwine in a dance as old as the land itself. With nothing but his ancestral wisdom and a fierce determination, Thomas prepares to challenge the most powerful man in the territory. But can ancient Apache ways triumph over modern authority when dawn breaks? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather-bound journal lay open on Sarah Mitchell's small writing desk, its pages illuminated by flickering candlelight. Her steady hand moved across the cream-colored paper, recording the day's events in the same precise penmanship she'd used to teach her students their letters. April 15th, 1875. Today, little Fox wrote his name in English for the first time. His eyes shone with such pride, I felt my own heart might burst. If only the territorial authorities could see what I see, these children's eagerness to learn, their quick minds, their gentle spirits. But the governor's men visited again, their shadows darkening my classroom door like storm clouds gathering. On the horizon, Sarah paused, her pen hovering above the page. Through the barred window of her chambers in the governor's mansion, she could see the moon rising over the Sangre de Cristo mountains. The same moon that had witnessed her arrival in Santa Fe just 8 months ago, full of hope and determination. She'd come west with high ideals and letters of recommendation from Boston's finest families tucked into her carpet bag. The daughter of a prominent Massachusetts judge, she'd been raised on principles of justice and equality. When the Indian Agency advertised for teachers willing to work with Native American children, Sarah had seen it as her calling, a chance to make a real difference in the world. The reality she found in New Mexico territory had been far more complex than she'd imagined. The local authorities paid lip service to education while doing everything in their power to suppress it. Governor Augustine Rivera, with his perfectly trimmed mustache and European education, spoke eloquently about civilizing the natives, while systematically dismantling every program designed to help them. Sarah dipped her pen in ink again, continuing. Her entry, the children sensed the tension. Today, Running Brook asked why the soldiers watch our school so closely. I told her they're interested in her progress, but she's too clever to believe such lies. These children deserve better than to be treated like prisoners in their own land. She closed her eyes, remembering the day 3 weeks ago when everything changed. She'd been teaching the children about the Constitution, its promises of liberty and justice for all. Governor Rivera himself had appeared in her classroom, his silver pocket watch gleaming as he leaned against her desk. A noble document, he'd said, his accent carefully cultivated to hide its Mexican origins. But surely you understand, Miss Mitchell, that its protections extend only to citizens. These savage children require a firmer hand. Sarah had stood her ground, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Every child has the right to learn, Your Excellency. The Treaty of 1868 specifically guarantees. The treaty, he'd laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. My dear Miss Mitchell, treaties are made to be broken. Just ask your father, the distinguished judge. The threat had been clear. Back, down or face consequences. But Sarah Mitchell was her father's daughter, shaped by generations of New England principle and Protestant conviction. She'd looked the governor in the eye and declared, "Then perhaps it's time someone taught you about keeping promises, sir." Now, as she sat in her gilded cage, Sarah added a final line to her journal. They may hold my body captive, but they cannot imprison my spirit or my conviction. The children's futures are worth any price I must pay." She closed the journal, running her fingers over its worn leather cover. Inside these pages lay the truth of her time here. The small triumphs and mounting fears, the children's progress, and the growing shadow of official interference. If anything happened to her, this record would survive to tell her story. From somewhere in the darkness beyond her window came the cry of a night bird, an eagle perhaps, or an owl. Sarah moved to the window, pressing her hand against the cool glass. Out there, beyond the governor's manicured gardens and high adobe walls, lay the vast New Mexico wilderness. Somewhere in that darkness, her Apache students slept in their family camps, perhaps dreaming of the stories and songs she'd taught them. The sound came again, closer this time, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something deliberate about that cry, something that spoke not of wild freedom, but of careful purpose. Or perhaps that was just her imagination, fed by too many nights alone with her thoughts and fears. She returned to her desk and picked up her journal one last time. Beneath the day's entry, she added a postscript. "I hear strange birds in the night. They call like hope on the wind, reminding me that beyond these walls, the spirit of freedom still soars." Thomas Running Eagle knelt in the pre-dawn darkness, his weathered hands unwrapping a deerskin bundle with the care others might show. A newborn child. Inside, nestled against soft leather, lay 3 eagle feathers, each marked with symbols that told the story of his path as a scout. The first bore the mark of his father's teaching, the second, his initiation as a warrior, and the third, the newest, carried a symbol he'd painted himself, a book crossed with an arrow. The morning wind whispered through the juniper trees, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant smoke of army campfires. Thomas lifted his face to that wind, reading its messages as clearly as the white men read their papers. It spoke of movement in the governor's mansion, of guards changing shifts, of a woman who walked in circles in an upper room. The spirits. A restless, his grandmother would have said. Thomas smiled at the memory of the old woman who had taught him to walk between 2 worlds. She had seen something in him when he was just a boy, not the warrior his father wanted, but something else. A bridge, she'd called him, though he hadn't understood then what she meant. His fingers traced the book symbol on the newest feather. 6 moons ago, he'd first seen the pale-skinned teacher with her strange ideas about educating Apache children. He'd watched from the shadows as she taught his cousin's daughter to make marks on paper that turned into words, words that carried power. At first, he'd been suspicious. Hadn't the white man's education always been a weapon against his people? But there was something different about this one. Sarah Mitchell taught more than just the white man's letters. She listened to the children's stories, learned their names in Apache, respected their ways. When Little Fox spoke of his grandfather's vision quest, she didn't dismiss it as superstition, but asked to hear more. When Running Brook brought traditional medicines to share, the teacher had carefully recorded each plant's properties in her book, giving equal weight to Apache wisdom and Western knowledge. Thomas rewrapped the bundle, securing it inside his buckskin shirt. Rising, he moved through the landscape like a shadow, each step placed with the precision of a lifetime spent reading the land. His role as a scout for both the army and his own people had taught him the value of moving unseen, of gathering information that could mean the difference between life and death. The governor's men thought they knew him, just another civilized Indian, useful for tracking renegades and interpreting the desert's mysteries. They didn't see how he watched them in return, noting their patterns, their weaknesses, their casual cruelties. They certainly didn't know about his nightly vigils near the mansion, observing the teacher's captivity with growing concern. Last night's council fire still burned in his memory. The elders had been clear. This is not our fight. The white woman chose her path when she defied their law. But Thomas had seen the fear in the children's eyes when they learned their teacher had been taken. He'd heard their mothers weeping quietly, remembering other loved ones lost to the governor's justice. The medicine bundle pressed against his chest as he moved, each step bringing him closer to the governor's domain. Its weight reminded him of his grandmother's last words to him. "Some paths choose us, grandson. When they do, all we can decide is how we walk them." The sun was rising now, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Thomas found his hidden observation point, a cluster of rocks that offered a clear view of Sarah's window, while keeping him concealed from the guards' routine patrols. As he settled in to watch, an eagle circled overhead, its cry piercing the morning silence. He touched the bundle again, feeling the power of the feathers within. His path was becoming clear, though it was not one the elders would choose. But then bridges must sometimes be built where others see only chasms. The treaty lay in pieces on Sarah's desk, its careful penmanship now bisected by an angry tear. Governor Rivera had made quite a show of destroying it, his manicured hands reducing years of promises to confetti before her eyes. "Consider this your final warning, Miss Mitchell," he'd said, letting the fragments flutter onto her lesson books. "Some things are better left in pieces." But Sarah had gathered every scrap, and now, in the privacy of her chambers, she pieced them together like a puzzle. Her fingers traced the words that had once held such hope: the education of children of said tribes in accordance with Christian civilization. The irony of using Christian principles to justify such unchristian behavior was not lost on her. Through her window, she could see the practice yard where the governor's guards drilled with their Springfield rifles. Their commander, Captain James Harrison, stood watching with his characteristic scowl. Since her imprisonment, he'd taken particular pleasure in positioning his men where they could observe her every move. "Making sure the savage lover doesn't try anything foolish," she'd overheard him tell his lieutenant. The words had stung, but not as much as seeing her students' faces pressed against the schoolhouse windows that morning, watching as the soldiers had escorted her away. From his hidden vantage point among the rocks, Thomas observed the garrisons, increasing activity with growing concern. More men had arrived yesterday, their uniforms crisp and new, not the usual threadbare troops assigned to territorial duty. These were special forces, brought in for a purpose that made his scouts' instincts prickle with warning. He'd sent word to the tribal council through his youngest brother. The governor was preparing for something, but the return message had been frustratingly familiar. "Watch only. Do not interfere." The elders, ever cautious after generations of broken promises, refused to risk tribal safety for one white woman. Yet Thomas had seen something in the teacher that the elders hadn't. During his covert observations of her classes, he'd witnessed her quiet strength, her unwavering dedication to truth. She taught the children not just reading and writing, but dignity, something the governor's civilizing programs had always sought to strip away. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention. A rider approached the mansion at speed, kicking up dust that caught the late afternoon light. Thomas recognized the man's bearing even before he could make out his face. Indian Agent William Cooper, the governor's most enthusiastic collaborator in managing the Apache problem. Sarah, too, had heard the arrival. She quickly gathered the treaty pieces, securing them between the pages of her Bible, one sacred text protecting another's broken promises. Cooper's voice carried up from the courtyard, his Texas drawl thick with satisfaction. "Governor, just got word from Washington. They're giving us free rein to handle the education situation as we see fit." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. He knew what free rein meant in the language of Indian agents. He'd seen its results in the forced relocations, the children torn from families, the systematic destruction of traditional ways, all done with the blessing of distant officials who never had to witness the consequences of their decisions. A flash of movement caught his eye. Sarah at her window, her face set in lines of quiet determination, as she too listened to Cooper's announcement. For a moment, she seemed to look directly at his hiding place, though Thomas knew his position was too well concealed. Still, something passed between them across the distance, a shared understanding of what was at stake. The eagle feathers in his medicine bundle felt warm against his chest, thrumming with a power that seemed to echo his own rising resolve. His grandmother had taught him that such signs should never be ignored. When spirit and purpose aligned, action must follow. As the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the governor's whitewashed walls in shades of blood and gold, Thomas made his decision. The elders counseled patience, but some injuries cut too deep for time alone to heal. Sometimes, as his grandmother had also taught him, one must break the old peace to forge a better one. He touched the eagle feathers once more, offering a silent prayer to the spirits of his ancestors. Tomorrow he would begin making preparations. The governor might have his treaties and his special forces, but Thomas had something far more powerful: the wisdom of his people and the certainty of his cause. Governor Augustine Rivera sat at his mahogany desk, the lamplight catching the silver threads in his dark hair as he examined the document before him. The official arrest warrant was a masterpiece of legal craftsmanship, its elaborate letterhead and formal language lending gravity to what was, in essence, a personal vendetta. In violation of Territorial Code 47.3, inciting indigenous persons to acts of rebellion through unauthorized education and distribution of seditious materials, his pen moved smoothly across the paper, each stroke of his signature an exercise in calculated authority. "You're certain this will hold up to scrutiny?" He directed the question at Judge Malcolm Whitaker, who stood by the fireplace nursing a glass of Rivera's finest Spanish brandy. "The language is ironclad, Augustine." The judge's jowly face reflected the firelight. "Besides, by the time anyone in Washington thinks to question it, the damage to her reputation will be done. No proper Eastern family will hire a schoolteacher who's been charged with inciting rebellion." Rivera allowed himself a small smile. It had taken months to orchestrate this moment, to build the case against Sarah Mitchell piece by piece. Her stubborn idealism had proven surprisingly resilient, but everyone had a breaking point. Even now, he could hear her pacing in the room above, her footsteps marking time like a metronome of imprisonment. "She's not what you think, Augustine," his wife Maria had pleaded just that morning. "I've watched her with those children. She teaches them respect, not rebellion." But Maria, for all her gentle wisdom, didn't understand the delicate balance of power in the territory. One teacher, one small act of defiance, could spark a flame that would consume years of carefully maintained control. He pressed his seal into the red wax at the bottom of the warrant, watching as it hardened into the official emblem of his office. The irony didn't escape him. He'd once been an idealist himself, fresh from his European education, determined to bring progress to this wild territory. But progress required order, and order demanded compliance. Captain Harrison entered without knocking, his boots leaving dusty prints on the Persian carpet. "Begging your pardon, Governor, but there's been another sighting. That Apache scout, Running Eagle, watching the mansion again." Rivera waved away the concern. "Let him watch. Thomas Running Eagle is too clever to act rashly. He values his position as liaison too much to risk it for one schoolteacher." But something in Harrison's stance suggested discomfort. "Sir, with respect, this one's different. My men say he's been making preparations, gathering supplies, meeting with contacts in town, and there's talk among the tribes." The governor set down his pen, studying the newly signed warrant. Perhaps he had overlooked something. Thomas Running Eagle had always been useful precisely because he straddled two worlds, trusted by the army, respected by his people. But such men could be dangerous if their loyalties shifted. "Double the guard," he decided, "and send word to Agent Cooper. I want every Apache camp within 50 miles watched. If Running Eagle is planning something, I want to know before he moves." The warrant seemed to mock him from the desk, its fresh ink glistening. One signature, binding not. Just Sarah Mitchell's fate, but perhaps his own as well. For a moment he remembered her first arrival, the light in her eyes, the passion in her voice, as she spoke of teaching children to read, to think, to dream. In another life, he might have admired such dedication. "Shall I deliver this to the territorial court for filing?" Judge Whitaker asked, reaching for the warrant. Rivera held up his hand. "No. Let it age a few days. Sometimes the mere existence of such a document can be more useful than its execution." He carefully folded the warrant and locked it in his desk drawer, next to the silver pocket watch that had been his father's legacy. Time was a weapon too, when wielded properly. Outside his window, the sun was setting behind the Sangre de Cristo. Mountains, painting them the color of their name, blood of Christ, a fitting omen perhaps for what was to come. Rivera poured himself a measure of brandy and raised it toward the darkening sky. Let them all watch. The scout, the teacher, the tribes. He had not maintained control of this territory by fearing shadows. The clay water pitcher sat on Sarah's windowsill, its rough surface catching the first light of dawn. It was Apache made, she knew. She recognized the distinctive patterns etched into its belly, similar to those she'd seen on vessels in her students' homes. Someone in the kitchen staff, perhaps the quiet woman who brought her meals, had replaced the governor's fine porcelain with this humble piece of craftsmanship. Sarah lifted the pitcher, feeling its honest weight, the slight imperfections that proved human hands had shaped it. Cool water sloshed inside as she poured some into her basin, and for a moment she was transported back to her classroom, watching Running Brook demonstrate traditional pottery techniques to her fellow students. "Each piece holds stories," the girl had explained, her small hands tracing the geometric patterns. "The clay remembers the hands that shaped it. The water remembers the vessels it has known." A sharp rap at the door interrupted her reverie. Elena, the governor's housekeeper, entered with fresh linens. Her dark eyes darted to the pitcher, and Sarah caught the smallest nod of acknowledgement. "The governor's wife asks if you would like to take air in the garden this morning," Elena said, her accent thick but her English careful. "She says the roses are particularly fine." Sarah understood the layers in this invitation. Maria Rivera had been trying to soften her husband's stance, using what influence she had to make Sarah's confinement more bearable. The garden walks were a small mercy, though always under the watch of armed guards. "Please tell Senora Rivera I would be honored," Sarah replied, matching Elena's formal tone. But as the housekeeper turned to leave, she added softly, "And thank you for the pitcher." Elena paused at the door, not turning around. "I do not know what you mean, señorita. It has always been here." But her shoulders carried a tension that spoke volumes. Later in the garden, Sarah watched Maria Rivera tend her roses with practiced care. The governor's wife was a study in contained grace, her movements precise as she pruned dead blooms from the bushes. "My husband," Maria began, then stopped, glancing at the guards who maintained a discreet distance. "Augustin was not always as you see him now. The territory has changed him, as it changes all who seek to rule it." Sarah touched a rose petal, feeling its silk-soft surface. "The territory doesn't need to be ruled, Senora. It needs to be understood." "Ah, but understanding requires wisdom, and wisdom—" Maria's scissors snipped another dead bloom. "Wisdom is not always compatible with power." A movement caught Sarah's eye. A shadow among the rocks beyond the garden wall. She kept her face carefully neutral, but her heart quickened. She had begun to recognize these fleeting signs of her hidden watcher, though she never let on that she knew of his presence. The clay pitcher had appeared the morning after she first spotted him. Since then, small signs of support had manifested. A sprig of sacred sage on her windowsill, the distant cry of an eagle at regular intervals, traditional medicines mixed with her tea when she'd fallen ill. "Your guards seem agitated today," Sarah observed, noting the increased patrols along the walls. Maria's scissors paused mid-snip. "There are rumors. The Apache camps are restless. Augustine fears, but no, I should not speak of such things." Sarah thought of her students, of their families in those camps. What stories were they telling around their fires? What plans were being whispered in the night? The pitcher in her room seemed to carry more weight now, not just a vessel for water, but a symbol of resistance, of cultural persistence in the face of oppression. "Tell me, Miss Mitchell," Maria said suddenly, her voice low, "if you could leave here, would you go back east? Return to your comfortable Boston life?" Sarah met the older woman's eyes, seeing the genuine concern there. "My life is here now, Senora, with my students, with this land, with these people who have trusted me to tell their stories." Maria nodded slowly, then reached into her sleeve and pressed something into Sarah's hand. A small key, its brass worn with age. "The south gate," she whispered. "The lock is old from before Augustine's time. Keep it hidden. Use it only if you must." Sarah closed her fingers around the key, feeling its potential weight far more than its physical presence. Like the pitcher, it represented choice, possibility, risk. She slipped it into her pocket just as Captain Harrison approached, his shadow falling across the roses. "Time to return to your quarters, Miss Mitchell," he announced, his tone leaving. No room for argument. As she followed him back to her gilded cage, Sarah felt both the key and the knowledge of her hidden watcher like twin flames of hope in the growing darkness. By candlelight in his hidden camp, Thomas spread the deerskin. Map before him, its surface covered with carefully drawn lines and symbols that would mean nothing to white men's eyes. His grandfather had taught him this way of recording the land, not just its physical features, but its spirit paths, its sacred places, its dangers and safe havens. Using a piece of charcoal, he added new marks to the area around the governor's mansion. Here, the guard patrol patterns, there the shadows cast by the moon at different hours, and most importantly, the places where the old ways of the land had survived beneath the white man's construction. "The earth remembers," his grandmother had always said. "Stone walls cannot change what the ground knows." And so he had spent weeks learning the mansion's secrets, not just its visible defenses, but the hidden trails that predated it, the underground springs that still flowed beneath its foundations, the ancient paths that even the governor's walls couldn't fully block. An owl's cry pierced the night, not a real owl, but little Fox's signal. Thomas quickly rolled the map and stepped out to meet his young cousin, who emerged from the darkness like a shadow given form. "The elders know," Little Fox whispered, his voice tight with concern. "They say you risk everything, your position, the tribe's safety, your life." Thomas nodded, having expected this. "Tell me what you saw inside the school today." Little Fox's expression shifted. "They're burning her books. Captain Harrison ordered all the Apache words removed, all our stories erased. Running Brook tried to save one, and they—" His voice caught. "They made an example of her father." Thomas felt the weight of his medicine bundle grow heavier. This was why the old ways of recording had survived. Marks on deerskin could be hidden, could survive. The white man's fires. He unrolled the map again, pointing to a section near the mansion's south wall. "See here, the old stream bed. Before the Spanish built the first mission, before the governor's mansion, our people used this path. The water still flows underneath, wearing away at the foundations. The walls look strong, but they're weakened there." Little Fox studied the marks intently. "The guards? They trust their walls too much. They look out, not down. And here—" Thomas traced a line along the eastern approach. "The junipers grow thick. They haven't cut them back because the governor's wife loves their smell. On a moonless night—" He stopped as another signal came. 3 quick flashes of light from the direction of town. Miguel, the Mexican stablemaster who had agreed to help, was warning of approaching riders. Little Fox melted back into the darkness without another word, understanding the need for swift departure. Thomas quickly added one final mark to his map, a small symbol that represented hope, a teaching from his grandmother about the power of patience and precise timing. The map was more than just a plan now. It was a convergence of past and present, a way of showing how the old paths could serve new purposes. Every mark told a story. Here, the Apache trails that had survived centuries. There, the weaknesses in the white man's defenses, and between them, the possibilities that emerged when one knew how to read both worlds. Thomas rolled the map carefully, storing it in a hollow tree along with other essential supplies. Rope made from native plants that wouldn't creak like manila hemp, dark cloth for covering reflective surfaces, medicine bundles prepared for strength and stealth. Each item had been chosen with both practical and spiritual purpose, honoring the teaching that every physical action should carry sacred intent. The approaching rider's hoofbeats grew louder. Thomas pressed himself against a boulder, becoming part of the landscape as Governor Rivera's patrol passed below his position. Their lanterns cut through the darkness, but they never thought to look up at the rocks where he hid. Another lesson from his grandfather about how people see only what they expect to see. When they had passed, Thomas touched the map's hiding place one last time. Tomorrow he would begin gathering his allies, not just other Apaches, but those like Miguel, who had their own reasons to oppose the governor's iron rule. The map would guide them, but more importantly, it would show them how the old ways and new needs could work together. "Grandmother," he whispered to the night wind, "guide my hands to draw the path of right action." The wind answered with a whisper through the junipers, carrying with it the distant scent of Sarah's rose garden. The moonstone pendant arrived, wrapped in a scrap of buckskin, tucked beneath Sarah's dinner plate like a secret meant to be discovered. As she held it to the fading light, its surface seemed to capture the dusk, white with hints of blue fire, like starlight trapped in stone. A small piece of paper accompanied it, bearing words in careful script. "For protection. The old ones say it holds the power of the moon herself." Sarah recognized Elena's handwriting, though she knew the words came from someone else. She slipped the pendant around her neck, concealing it beneath her high collar. Its weight felt significant, not just physically but spiritually, a talisman connecting her to forces older than the stone walls that held her. Through her window, she watched the moon rise over the mountains, nearly full now. The guards below cast long shadows across the courtyard, their rifles gleaming dully in the silvery light. There were more of them tonight. Something had the governor's men on edge. "They know something's coming," Elena had whispered while collecting her breakfast dishes that morning. "The Apache camps are too quiet. Even the birds sing differently." The housekeeper's dark eyes had held a mixture of fear and anticipation that Sarah understood all too well. In her room, the clay water pitcher caught moonlight on its rough surface, seeming to glow with an inner light. Sarah touched her hidden pendant, feeling a connection between the two objects, both made by Apache hands, both carrying messages of hope and resistance. A soft tapping sound drew her attention. At first, she thought it was just another branch scraping against the walls, but the rhythm was too deliberate. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. She moved to the window, careful to stay in the shadows. In the darkness below, a figure melted from shadow to shadow with fluid grace. Thomas, running eagle. She had learned to recognize his movements over the past weeks, though they had never spoken. He was teaching her a new language, one of signals and silent messages. She reached for the pendant, remembering the stories her students had shared about Moonstone's power to bridge worlds. Running Brook had once told her how her grandmother used such stones for dreamwalking, for sending messages across great distances. 3 more taps, then a flash of something metallic, a mirror catching moonlight in a pattern. Sarah's heart quickened. They had been practicing this, though she had never been sure if her responses were understood. She moved the clay pitcher slightly, letting its water surface reflect moonlight back in the agreed signal. From the courtyard came the sound of boots on stone, guards changing shifts. Thomas vanished like morning mist, but Sarah caught his. Final signal, A closed fist raised, then opened like a blooming flower. Soon, she sat at her small desk, pulling out her journal while keeping the pendant close against her skin. Its cool surface seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, and she found herself writing with renewed purpose. The moon watches us all equally, governor and prisoner, guard and scout. Her light reveals and conceals, teaches those who would learn. Her rhythms. I understand now what my students tried to tell me about their grandmother's wisdom. Some knowledge cannot be bound by classroom walls or prison bars. It flows like water, seeps through stone, carries truth in its current. A commotion from below interrupted her writing, raised voices, the clatter of weapons. She moved carefully back to the window. Captain Harrison was berating his men, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Double the patrols! If that Apache scout comes within 100 yards of these walls, I want him shot. The governor's orders are clear. No one approaches, especially not at night." Sarah touched the pendant again, drawing comfort from its smooth surface. They feared what they couldn't control, couldn't understand. But there were older powers at work here than military might or political authority. She thought of Thomas, moving through the darkness, carrying messages between worlds, just as she had tried to bridge cultures in her classroom. The moonstone seemed warmer now, almost alive against her skin. Perhaps this was what Runningbrook's grandmother meant about stones holding power. Not magic, but connection, memory, purpose. The moon climbed higher, and Sarah began her nightly ritual of pacing her room 7 steps by 9. But tonight each step felt different, purposeful. The pendant swayed with her movement, marking time like a metronome, counting down to something she could feel approaching, as surely as the tide follows the moon's pull. The guard's lantern lay shattered in the courtyard, its brass frame twisted and glass scattered like fallen stars across the flagstones. Sarah watched from her window as Captain Harrison kicked the pieces aside, his face illuminated by torchlight as he berated the young sentry who'd dropped it during the chaos. "Fool boy, your negligence could have cost us everything." Harrison's voice carried clearly in the night air. "If that Apache had made it over the wall—" But Sarah knew better. Thomas hadn't failed to make it over the wall. He'd never intended to cross it in the first place. The lantern was a message, carefully orchestrated like everything else about this night. Its broken pieces caught the torchlight, creating a pattern that only those who knew to look would recognize. An arrow pointing east. The night's events played back in her mind as she fingered the moonstone pendant beneath her collar. It had begun with owl calls, 3 distinct cries that had drawn the guard's attention to the western wall. Then came the shadows, darting movements that kept the sentries turning in circles, jumping at phantoms. She had played her part as well, accidentally knocking over her water pitcher at the precise moment Thomas had signaled. The crash had drawn Elena to her room, creating a perfectly timed distraction as shadows moved below. Now she watched Governor Rivera himself stride into the courtyard, his silver pocket watch catching the torchlight as he consulted it. "Report, Captain," he barked, every inch the military commander he'd once been. "Apache scout, sir, running eagle. Tried to breach the west wall. Sanders here dropped his lantern when he spotted him, but the bastard was gone before we could get a shot off." Rivera's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scattered glass. "And the prisoner?" "Confined to her room, sir. Made some noise earlier, but the housekeeper checked on her. She's secure." Sarah stepped back from the window as Rivera's gaze swept upward. In the darkness of her room, she retrieved the small package that Elena had slipped her during the manufactured chaos. A leather pouch containing dried meat, a flint, and most importantly, a detailed message written in Thomas's careful hand. "Not tonight," it read. "The moon is too bright, the guards too alert. But now they think they know my plan. They will watch the walls and forget what lies beneath. 3 nights from now, when the moon wanes." A sharp knock at her door made her quickly hide the package beneath her mattress. Captain Harrison entered. Without waiting for a response, his boots tracking courtyard dust across her floor. "Quite a commotion tonight, Miss Mitchell," he said, making a show of checking her window bars. "I trust you found it entertaining?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I found it concerning, Captain. All this violence over a teacher who only wants to help children learn." "Help them learn rebellion, you mean?" He moved closer, trying to intimidate with his bulk. "We know Running Eagle was one of your students' relatives. Did you really think we wouldn't figure out your connection to him?" Sarah thought of the broken lantern below, how its scattered pieces formed a message hidden in plain sight. "I think, Captain, that you see exactly what you expect to see and nothing more." Something in her tone made Harrison pause. He studied her face in the dim light, perhaps sensing the change in her, no longer the frightened prisoner, but a woman with purpose. His hand moved to the grip of his pistol, unconsciously revealing his unease. "The governor's patience grows thin," he warned. "If I were you, I'd pray your Apache friend doesn't try anything foolish. His next attempt might not end with just a broken lantern." After he left, Sarah returned to the window. Below, workers swept up the broken glass, unknowingly, destroying Thomas's signal. But it didn't matter. She had received his message, understood the brilliance of this false attempt. The guards would be doubly vigilant now, but their attention would be misdirected. They would watch the walls, reinforce the gates, never suspecting that the true plan involved neither. Thomas had sacrificed a pawn to protect his real strategy, like the chess games her father had taught her long ago in Boston. She touched the moonstone pendant again, drawing strength from its cool surface. 3 nights would give Rivera's men time to grow complacent in their certainty that they had thwarted the Apache scouts' best attempt. 3 nights for the moon to darken, for the guards to tire of jumping at shadows. From the courtyard came the final sounds of the lantern's remains being cleared away, but its message lingered like the echo of breaking glass, not a signal of failure, but a promise of what was to come. Elena's trembling fingers worked the final knot into the friendship bracelet, weaving together threads of blue, white, and red, the colors of both American liberty and Mexican pride. But it was the black thread running through the pattern that carried the real message, marking safe houses along the escape route in a code as old as the Spanish conquest. "My grandmother taught me this pattern," she whispered to Sarah, pretending to adjust the prisoner's bedding while slipping the bracelet into her hand. "Each knot is a prayer, each color a story. The black thread shows the way through darkness." Sarah studied the intricate weaving, remembering how Running Brook had once demonstrated similar patterns in class. "The threads speak to those who know how to listen," the girl had said. Now Sarah understood the deeper meaning behind those words. Miguel, the stable master, had been the first to join their conspiracy, his hatred of the governor's cruelty, outweighing years of careful submission. Then came Maria Rivera's tacit support, shown in quiet acts of defiance, guards reassigned, doors left unlocked. Now Elena, whose network of servants and townspeople had eyes and ears throughout Santa. "Hey, Thomas Running Eagle visited my cousin's house last night," Elena continued softly, her hands busy with meaningless household tasks. "He says when the time comes, fires will draw the guards to the north side of town. My people will make sure of it." Sarah traced the pattern of knots, reading the message hidden in their arrangement. 5 houses marked along the route to the Apache camps, each represented by a specific combination of threads. The governor's men might find the bracelet, but they would see only a feminine trinket, a prisoner's attempt to pass the time. "The kitchen boy says Captain Harrison posted extra men on the walls," Elena added, her voice barely above a whisper. "But he also says they drink more now, jumping at shadows since the night of the lantern." Through her window, Sarah could see those same walls, solid and imposing in the afternoon sun. But now she knew their secrets, which guards could be trusted, which ones were prone to sleep at their posts, which sections of the parapet were hidden from other watchpoints. The governor's wife, Sarah asked, keeping her voice low. "Senora, Rivera visits her sister tomorrow. She made sure the captain knows she needs 6 guards to escort her." Eleanor's eyes held meaning. 6 men who won't be here. Sarah nodded, understanding. Maria Rivera had chosen her side, in her own careful way. The bracelet felt warm against her palm, alive with the hopes and risks of all those who had dared to help her. The sound of boots in the hallway sent Elena quickly back to her duties. Captain Harrison appeared in the doorway, his suspicious gaze sweeping the room. "Everything in order here?" "Si, Capitan." Elena bobbed a curtsy, just changing the senorita's linens. Harrison's eyes fixed on Sarah's closed hand. "What's that you're holding, Miss Mitchell?" With practiced calm, Sarah opened her palm to reveal the bracelet. "A poor attempt at passing time, Captain. Elena was showing me how the Mexican women weave patterns." She gave a hollow laugh. "Though I fear I have little talent for it." Harrison's mouth twisted in contempt. "Keep to your books, teacher. And you," he turned to Eleanor, "the governor wants his dinner served early tonight. See to it." After they were alone again, Sarah tied the bracelet around her wrist, letting the black thread rest against her pulse point. Like the moonstone pendant, still hidden beneath her collar, it connected her to a web of resistance larger than herself. Through her window, she caught a glimpse of Thomas moving among the rocks beyond the wall. To untrained eyes, he would appear to be simply going about his scout duties. But Sarah saw how he paused at specific points, noting guard positions, measuring distances, the bracelet's knots pressed against her skin like a code in some ancient alphabet, spelling out hope in a language of trust and defiance. Each person who had contributed to its making had woven in their own promise of help, of silence, of courage when the moment came. Elena had said each knot was a prayer. Sarah added her own now, a quiet meditation on the strength found in unexpected alliances, in the courage of ordinary people standing against injustice. The threads of many lives had come together in this simple bracelet, just as their fates would soon be woven together in one daring bid for freedom. The dance card dangled from Sarah's wrist by a silk ribbon, its gilt-edged pages filled with the names of Santa Fe's most prominent men. Governor Rivera had insisted she attend the ball, a calculated display of his authority, forcing his prisoner to dance and smile as if she were merely an honored guest. "You see, Miss Mitchell," he murmured as they moved through the steps of a waltz, his hand properly positioned at her waist. "Civilization has its pleasures, so much more refined than squatting in the dust with savage children, wouldn't you agree?" Sarah kept her face pleasantly neutral, though the moonstone pendant felt hot against her skin beneath her borrowed ball gown. "The Apache have their own dances, Your Excellency, their own music, their own grace. Ah, but here you are, dressed in silk instead of buckskin, dancing to Strauss rather than tribal drums." His grip tightened slightly. "Perhaps you're finally learning where you truly belong." As they turned, Sarah caught glimpses of the other players in tonight's complex choreography. Elena moving among the guests with a tray of champagne, her eyes conveying silent messages to trusted allies. Miguel standing by the stable doors, seemingly at attention, but watching the guards' positions. Maria Rivera holding court among the ladies, ensuring that key military officers remained distracted by social obligations. The dance card recorded more than just partners' names. Tiny dots pressed into the paper beside certain entries marked which soldiers would be assigned to escort dignitaries home, which guards would be sleeping off too much champagne, which officers had been deliberately scheduled for dawn patrol after a late night of revelry. "Captain Harrison is eager for the next dance," Governor Rivera said as the waltz ended. "Do humor him, my dear. He so rarely gets to demonstrate his cultural refinement." Sarah checked her card, noting the captain's name written in his forceful hand. She had watched him consume several glasses of wine already, his face growing flushed above his dress uniform's high collar. Another piece of the evening's careful planning. "You're very quiet tonight." Harrison commented as he led her none too, steadily through a quadrille. No lectures about equality or education. Would you like one, Captain? Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps a discussion of the Apache traditions of military strategy. They're quite fascinating theories. Of nighttime warfare, Harrison's face darkened. You think we don't know what Running Eagle is planning? My men are ready for him. One wrong move, and surely such talk can wait until tomorrow, Maria Rivera interrupted smoothly, appearing at their side. Captain, General Martinez was hoping you'd share that fascinating story about your campaigns against the Comanche. Sarah, dear, you simply must try the champagne punch. As Maria led her away, Sarah felt the weight of the dance card against her wrist. Such a delicate thing, yet like the friendship bracelet hidden beneath her glove, it held layers of meaning. Every dance was a message, every partner's name a piece of the puzzle. Through the ballroom's tall windows, she could see the full moon, riding high above the mansion's walls. Its light caught the silver threads in Governor Rivera's hair as he conferred with his officers, all of them looking so confident in their control of the territory, of its people, of her. She thought of Thomas out there in the darkness, using this night of European refinement to further his own plans. The governor's ball had drawn every important official in Santa Fe to the mansion, along with their wives, servants, and guards. The perfect distraction, the perfect gathering of information. Your next dance, I believe. Judge Whitaker appeared. At her elbow, his jowly face sheened with perspiration. Unless you're too fatigued? Sarah consulted her dance card, though she had memorized its cryptic messages. Not at all, Judge. I believe it's a real. Indeed, my dear. Quite energetic. I trust you'll be able to keep up? His condescending smile spoke volumes about his view of her usual company. As they took their places in the set, Sarah caught Eleanor's eye across the room. The housekeeper gave an almost imperceptible nod. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The champagne flowed freely, the music played on, and beneath the glittering surface of the governor's ball, the currents of revolution swirled like a hidden river beneath the desert's surface. Sarah touched the dance card, its pages now soft. With handling, tomorrow it would be nothing but a souvenir of an elegant evening. But tonight, it was a battle plan disguised as a social agenda, each dance a step closer to freedom. In the pre-dawn darkness, Thomas knelt before the medicine wheel he had crafted from stones and sacred objects, each item placed with precise care, according to the old ways. East, an eagle feather for wisdom and the rising sun. South, red ochre for the fire of action. West, a clay bowl of water for the spirit world's guidance. North, a white shell for the ancestors' strength. At the wheel's center lay Sarah's handkerchief, stolen from her laundry by Elena, a physical connection to the one they would soon try to free. Thomas touched each direction in turn, remembering his grandmother's teachings about the wheel's power to align earthly action with spiritual purpose. The wheel turns like the seasons, she had told him, but also like the thoughts in a man's heart. When all directions come into balance, the path becomes clear. A soft footfall interrupted his meditation. Little Fox emerged from the shadows, followed by other young men from the tribe, those who had chosen to defy the elders' caution. Each carried something for the wheel, herbs, stones, personal tokens of power. The cavalry changed their patrol schedule, Little Fox reported softly. Just as the dance card predicted, they're all nursing sore heads this morning. Thomas nodded, adding this information to his mental map, but his focus remained on the medicine wheel, reading the signs hidden in how the morning's first light caught the dew on the eagle feather, how the wind stirred the herbs. My grandmother visited in a dream, one of the young men, Sharp Knife, whispered. She showed me an owl flying through darkness, carrying starlight in its wings. The old ones are with us. Around the wheel, each man shared his dreams and visions. Thomas listened carefully, not just to their words, but to the deeper currents of meaning. His people had always known that the spirit world spoke through dreams, through natural signs, through the subtle language of intuition. The medicine wheel seemed to gather their shared purpose, focusing it like sunlight through crystal. Thomas saw how each man's position around the circle reflected his role in tonight's plan. Little Fox in the east for his speed and new ideas, Sharp Knife in the south for his warrior's heart, Quiet Water in the west for his knowledge of spirit ways, Stone Singer in the north for his steady strength. "The governor thinks he understands power," Thomas said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "He builds walls of stone, stations men with guns, writes laws on paper. But there are older powers in this land." The first rays of sun crept over the horizon, catching the eagle feather and setting it aflame with light. In that moment, Thomas felt the wheel's energy align, not just the physical objects, but the spiritual forces they represented. Everything had led to this. His years of learning both Apache and outweighs, Sarah's brave stand for their children, the network of allies who had risen to support them. From his medicine bundle, he drew out the moonstone pendant's twin, identical to the one he had sent to Sarah. He placed it in the wheel's center, beside her handkerchief, completing the connection. "Our ancestors didn't just fight with arrows and spears," he reminded the young men. "They fought with wisdom, with patience, with the power of the land itself. Tonight, we do the same." The others nodded, understanding. They had been raised on stories of the old ones' victories, not just in battle but in survival, in maintaining their ways against all attempts to break them. This night would add another story to that legacy. Little Fox touched the earth at the wheel's eastern edge. The children at the school, they sing songs about her. They say she taught them that words have power, that stories can change hearts. "Yes," Thomas agreed, remembering how he had watched Sarah teach, how she had shown respect for Apache ways, even while sharing her own knowledge. "That's why the governor fears her. She shows our young ones how to be strong in both worlds." The sun climbed higher, and Thomas led the men in a final prayer, their voices blending in ancient sounds that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The medicine wheel held their intentions, their hopes, their combined strength. When darkness fell again, they would need all of it. As they dispersed to their positions, Thomas carefully buried the wheel where it would continue its sacred work. Unseen, tonight, when the moon was dark and the governor's men looked only to their walls and weapons, other forces would be at play. Forces as old as the land, as strong as justice, as unstoppable as the dawn. Sarah's fingers trembled as she removed the silver hair clip, her last possession from Boston, a gift from her father when she graduated from teaching college. Its elegant curves caught the faint lamplight as she placed it deliberately on her dressing table, a message in itself. Sarah Mitchell was here, everything proper and in place. Below her window, the governor's garden lay in deeper shadow than usual. The moon had waned to nothing, and clouds veiled the stars. Even the usual torches seemed dimmer, as if the very light conspired with their plans. Through her door came the sound of guards changing shift, their boots heavy on the wooden floors. She touched the moonstone pendant for courage, felt the friendship. Bracelets knots against her wrist. Elena had brought her dinner early, with a message hidden beneath the napkin. "When the mission bells strike 10, be ready." The first bell tone reverberated through the night air. 2 streets away, Miguel opened the stable doors, releasing 6 horses into the night. Their thundering hooves drew guards from their posts, voices shouting in confusion. 3 bells. In the servants' quarters, Elena began screaming about fire, her voice pitched to carry across the courtyard. The smell of burning sage, carefully placed near a kitchen vent, added credibility to her panic. 5 bells. On the north side of town, the first real fires began. Small, controlled blazes set by Little Fox and his friends in abandoned buildings, designed to pull more guards from the mansion. 7 bells. Sarah slipped off her proper shoes, replacing them with the soft moccasins Elena had smuggled to her. The silver clip gleamed on her dressing table like a goodbye to her old life. 9 bells. Through her window she saw Thomas for the first time in full view, moving with liquid grace across the moonless garden. The guards were focused on the commotion in town, their attention drawn by the multiple disruptions that had been orchestrated for this moment. 10 bells. Sarah pressed the key into the old lock on her door, the one Maria Rivera had given her in the rose garden. It turned with barely a whisper. In the hallway, the usual guard was missing, drawn away by Elena's manufactured crisis. She moved like a shadow herself now, remembering Thomas's instructions passed through Eleanor. Walk toe to heel. Keep your weight balanced. Think like water flowing over stones. The servants' stairs were empty, just as planned. The kitchen lay deserted, the burning sage still sending its smoke up through the vents. Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection. In a copper pot, hair loose without its silver clip, face transformed by purpose. She looked, she realized, like someone ready to become something new. A soft owl call drifted through the kitchen window. Not a real owl, but Thomas's signal. Sarah moved to the window, where the bars had been carefully loosened over weeks of patient work by Miguel. They came away in her hands, silent as prayer. Thomas appeared like a spirit materialized from darkness. No words were spoken. They had planned this moment too carefully to risk sound now. His hands found hers, strong and sure, helping her through the window. They froze as voices approached, guards responding to some new crisis in the stables. Sarah felt Thomas's grip tighten, felt the quiet power in his stillness. They pressed against the wall, becoming part of its shadow as boots passed mere feet away. When the guards had gone, they moved through the garden like wind through grass. Sarah thought of her silver hair clip gleaming on the dressing table above, imagined the governor's face when he realized its significance. She had left behind more than just an ornament. She had left the proper Boston schoolteacher she had once been. The old gate that Maria had told her about lay hidden behind overgrown roses. Its hinges had been carefully oiled by Miguel, and it opened without a sound. Beyond it lay darkness, but Sarah felt no fear. The moonstone pendant gave her courage. The friendship bracelet reminded her of all who had risked themselves for this moment, and Thomas's hand in hers spoke of a different kind of future than any she had imagined in her younger days. Behind them, the mansion erupted in new confusion, shouts and running feet as her empty room was discovered. But by then they were moving through the shadows of Santa Fe's narrow streets, Thomas leading her along routes marked in the patterns of Elena's bracelet toward the waiting horses and the promise of freedom. Sarah touched her hair where the clip had been, feeling strangely lighter without it. She was no longer the woman who had arrived from Boston with such certainty about right and wrong, civilization and savagery. That silver clip on the dressing table marked the end of one life and the beginning of another, one that would be harder, perhaps, but truer to everything she had learned about justice and courage in this harsh, beautiful land. Thomas pulled the carefully preserved star chart from his leather pouch as they paused in a sheltered canyon. Its surface, drawn on brain-tanned deerskin, showed not just the star patterns above, but their relationship to the sacred landmarks below. His grandfather had crafted it decades ago, mapping the night sky's eternal dance with the high deserts. Ancient geography. The stars tell two stories, he explained softly to Sarah as she caught her breath beside him. The one white men know, with their Greek myths and measured distances, and the one my people know, about how Sky Father guides us through the dark times. Sarah studied the intricate markings, recognizing some constellations from her Eastern education, but seeing them transformed through Apache understanding. Like having two languages in your head, she whispered, each one true in its own way. Behind them, carried on the wind, came the distant sound of pursuit, horses' hooves, and men's voices still far but pursuing with determination. The governor's men would be using their own charts, their military maps with carefully surveyed coordinates and marked trails. "They'll expect us to take the easier paths," Thomas said, his finger tracing a line across the star chart. "Through the passes where the cavalry patrol, but the old ones knew other ways." He pointed to a pattern of stars low on the horizon. "See there, the dancing warriors? They point to a path that was old when the Spanish first came." They mounted again, Sarah adapting to the unfamiliar rhythm of her horse, learning to trust its sure-footedness in the darkness. Thomas led them up trails that seemed to disappear into solid rock, only to emerge on hidden ledges and through narrow defiles that his chart revealed. "My grandfather added to this chart all his life," Thomas explained during another brief rest. "Not just the stars and paths, but the stories that bind them together. Here," he pointed to a series of marks around a star cluster, "is the tale of how Coyote scattered the Pleiades across the sky. But it's also a map showing where to find water in the driest season." Sarah touched the chart's surface reverently, feeling the years of knowledge preserved in its crafting. "Like my students' stories about their grandmother's wisdom. Not just legends, but survival wrapped in memory." The moon's absence, which had aided their escape from the mansion, now made the stars burn brighter, turning the chart in Thomas's hands into a living map of light. Each constellation he pointed out became a guide, a reminder that the same stars had led his people to safety for countless generations. A owl's cry pierced the night, a real one this time, not a signal. Thomas read this too, understanding the message in its direction and timing. "Riders coming up from the south," he said, "but they're on the wrong trail. The stars will lead us east, through the Shadowlands." Sarah felt the moonstone pendant pulse warmly against her skin as they rode into a narrow valley that seemed to appear from nowhere. The friendship bracelet's knots caught occasionally on her sleeve, reminding her of all those who had risked themselves to make this journey possible. Thomas consulted the chart again, comparing the star positions with marks that looked like random decorations to untrained eyes. "The Spanish called these lands empty," he said, as they picked their way through a field of massive boulders. "They drew their maps showing blank spaces between their settlements. But our charts show the truth. Every canyon holds a story. Every ridge has a name." Dawn was approaching, the stars beginning to fade, when they reached a place where the chart showed a complex spiral of symbols. Thomas led them into what appeared to be a solid wall of rock, only to reveal a narrow crack that opened into a hidden canyon. "The morning star will find us safe," he said, helping Sarah dismount. "This place isn't on any cavalry map. The old ones used it when they needed to disappear from Spanish eyes." The canyon provided water, grazing for the horses, and most importantly, concealment. As they settled in to rest, Thomas carefully rewrapped the star chart, but not before adding his own small mark, a symbol showing how the dancing warriors had guided them to safety on this night. Sarah watched him work, understanding that she was witnessing the continuation of something profound, not just their escape, but the ongoing story of a people who had learned to read freedom in the stars. The chart was more than a map. It was a living document of resistance and survival, each generation adding its own truth to the eternal patterns above. The cavalry bugle's call echoed off the canyon walls, its bright notes carrying far in the clear morning air. Captain Harrison had chosen to use the instrument instead of rifle shots for signals, 3 short blasts for sighting tracks, 1 long note for changing direction, 2 quick bursts for calling the units together. Thomas pressed his palm against the red rock face, feeling the vibrations of approaching hoofbeats through the stone. "The bugle betrays them," he whispered to Sarah. "Sound travels strangely in these canyons. What they think guides their men actually guides us, tells us where not to be." They had left their horses hidden with Little Fox in a narrow box canyon, proceeding on foot through passages too tight for mounted pursuit. Sarah's moccasins, now worn to her feet's shape, let her move almost as silently as Thomas. Another bugle call, closer this time. 3 short notes. "They found where we crossed the stream," Thomas interpreted, but his slight smile showed no concern. They had deliberately left those tracks, leading away from their true path. "Harrison was so proud of bringing that bugle from West Point," Sarah said, as they pressed into the shadow of an overhanging cliff. "He told me at the governor's ball how it represented military precision, the advance of civilization into the wilderness." Thomas helped her over a fallen boulder, his movements precise and economical. "My grandfather would say the land itself rejects such foreign sounds. Listen, hear how the echo distorts the notes? The canyons turn their ordered signals into chaos." As if to prove his point, another bugle call fragmented against the rock walls, bouncing back and forth until it was impossible to tell its origin. They heard voices cursing in English, the troops' frustration carrying clearly. "Split up," Harrison's voice commanded. "Rodriguez, take your men north along the ridge. Martin, follow that game trail east. The rest with me. We'll sweep the main canyon." Thomas and Sarah crouched behind a massive fallen rock as horses thundered past their position below. The bugle sang out again, 2 quick notes calling for assembly, but the echoes made it sound like multiple bugles calling from different directions. "They fight against the land instead of reading it," Thomas observed quietly. "See how they look only at the ground, searching for tracks. They never raise their eyes to see how the rock faces lean, how the water has carved paths, how the desert plants show the way." Sarah touched her moonstone pendant, feeling its cool strength. "Like they did with the Apache children in school before me, trying to impose their order instead of understanding what's already there." More hoofbeats approached, and they pressed deeper into their hiding place. Sarah caught glimpses of the riders through gaps in the rocks. Tired men on lathered horses, their bright uniforms stained with red dust. Harrison rode at their head, the bugle bouncing at his hip, his face dark with frustration. "Spread out!" he commanded. "They have to be here somewhere. Running Eagle can't know these canyons better than our maps." Thomas's slight chuckle held centuries of irony. The cavalry passed below them, and he pointed to scratches on the rock face beside them. Ancient petroglyphs marking this very hiding spot. My ancestors were leaving maps here when his people were still living in caves in Europe. The bugle called again, its notes increasingly desperate as the morning wore on. Each call helped Thomas and Sarah time their movement between hiding places, always staying in the spaces between where the sound suggested searchers would go. "The governor will be furious," Sarah whispered during one pause. "All his men, his maps, his military precision, and we slip between them like water through stone." "Pride blinds them," Thomas replied. "They believe only what they can write down, measure, command. They hear their bugle and think it ordains their dominion over the land. They don't understand that its voice reveals their weakness." The sun climbed higher, heating the rocks until waves of distortion rose from their surfaces. The bugle calls grew more scattered, the commands more frustrated. Horses needed water, men were tired, and the desert itself seemed to conspire against them. Finally, they heard Harrison's angry voice. "Fall back to the rendezvous point. We'll get fresh mounts and start again from there." The bugle sounded one long note of retreat, its clear voice almost mournful as it echoed through the canyons. Thomas and Sarah waited until the last sounds of horses had faded, then emerged from their hiding place. "They'll try again," Thomas said, studying the canyon walls, "but by then we'll be beyond their maps in places their bugle has never called." He helped Sarah up a narrow trail that seemed to disappear into the rock face itself. "The land remembers its own. All we have to do is listen better than they do." Behind them, faintly, they heard one final bugle call, a frustrated, truncated sound that the canyon walls caught and transformed into something like laughter. The ancient petroglyphs emerged from shadow as the setting sun struck the canyon wall, their weathered surfaces telling stories that reached back through centuries. Thomas led Sarah to a particular panel where spiraling figures danced around a central sacred symbol. "My grandmother called this the place of whispered prayers," he said, his voice soft with reverence. "Our people have come here in times of trouble since before the Spanish, before the Pueblos. The old ones believed the barrier between worlds was thinner here." Sarah reached out to touch the rock face, feeling the textured surface where countless hands had carved their stories. Among the traditional symbols, she recognized elements that spoke of resistance and survival: Spanish horses, European weapons, but always transformed through Apache understanding into something deeper than mere historical record. "Here," Thomas pointed to a series of interconnected spirals. "This tells of another escape generations ago. A band of our people took sanctuary here when the Spanish first came with their crosses and swords. The soldiers searched for weeks, but never found this place." Little Fox appeared silently from a hidden cleft, nodding respectfully toward the petroglyphs before speaking. "The horses are settled. Sharp Knife and the others have taken positions along the outer canyons. No sign of pursuit since the bugle calls faded." The young man had matured in the days since their escape, his boyish eagerness transformed into purposeful focus. He handed Thomas a bundle of dried meat and corn cakes, then melted away again into the maze of rock passages that protected their sanctuary. Sarah studied the ancient carvings while she ate, recognizing themes from her students' stories: the sacred mountains, the spirit beings, the delicate balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. But there were other messages too, practical information encoded in the symbolic patterns. "The petroglyphs are both art and map," Thomas explained, following her gaze. "See this line of dots? It marks hidden springs that never go dry. These zigzag patterns, they show paths that stay shaded during summer heat. Our ancestors left us more than just stories. They left instructions for survival." A cool breeze carried the scent of sage through the canyon, and with it came the distant cry of an eagle. Sarah touched her moonstone pendant, feeling how its energy seemed stronger in this sacred space. The friendship bracelet's knots caught the last sunlight, reminding her of all those who had helped them reach this sanctuary. "Governor Rivera won't give up easily," she said, voicing the concern that had weighted her thoughts. "He'll see this as a challenge to everything he represents." Thomas nodded, his fingers tracing a spiral that showed conflict and resolution. "But he'll have to find us first. And unlike the petroglyphs, which have endured centuries of sun and storm, his paper maps can't capture the true nature of this place." As darkness settled into the canyon, Thomas built a small fire in a hollow where its light wouldn't be visible from outside. The flames cast shifting shadows across the petroglyph wall, making the ancient figures seem to dance and move. "Tomorrow, more of our people will come," he said, adding fragrant pinon branches to the fire. "Those who remember the old ways, who still know how to read the stories in stone. We'll need their wisdom for what's ahead." Sarah wrapped herself in a blanket woven with traditional patterns, another gift from their growing network of allies. What do the petroglyphs say about times like these? About choosing between safety and justice? Thomas studied the wall thoughtfully, where firelight and shadow transformed the ancient carvings into living things. "They say that survival sometimes means knowing when to hide and sometimes knowing when to stand. See this symbol here? It shows two paths that seem to go different ways but end up joining. The old ones understood that what looks like opposition can become unity." A subtle movement caught their attention, Sharp Knife returning from his watch. The young warrior carried something wrapped in a ceremonial cloth, which he presented to Thomas with quiet dignity. "Found this while scouting the high passes," he said. "The place matched the pattern in the star chart." Thomas carefully unwrapped the bundle, revealing a piece of carved stone that perfectly matched a space in the wall before them. A fragment of the ancient petroglyphs that had fallen long ago. As he lifted it to its original position, the firelight revealed its pattern, a figure standing between two worlds, arms outstretched as if bridging a divide. "The ancestors speak," Thomas said softly. Even the broken pieces find their way home when the time is right. Sarah watched as he secured the fragment in place, completing a story that had waited perhaps centuries to be whole again. In that moment, she understood that they weren't just hiding in this canyon, they were becoming part of its continuing narrative, adding their own marks to the eternal conversation between past and future, carved into living stone. The peace pipe lay before them on a ceremonial blanket, its red stone bowl and wooden stem bearing the marks of generations of use. Around it sat an unlikely council, Thomas and the young Apache warriors, Sarah, and most surprisingly, Maria Rivera, who had made the dangerous journey to the canyon despite her husband's orders. Augustine has lost himself in this pursuit, Maria said, her aristocratic composure wavering. He speaks of nothing but capturing you both, as if his very honor depends on it. Yesterday he ordered the cavalry to begin burning Apache camps until someone reveals your location. Thomas studied the pipe, its surface reflecting the afternoon light that filtered through the canyon's high walls. Then the time for hiding is over. We must meet him on ground of our choosing. Sarah touched the moonstone pendant that had guided their escape. The children's families can't suffer for our actions. Which is why I came, Maria added. There may be a way to end this without more bloodshed. She withdrew a document from her sleeve, the original arrest warrant for Sarah, its official seal now broken. The governor's authority rests on documents like this, but papers can burn, and memories in Santa Fe are short when it comes to official matters. Little Fox, who had been watching the canyon's entrance, suddenly appeared. Riders approaching, many of them. They found the false trail we left just as planned. Thomas lifted the peace pipe, its significance heavy in his hands. Then we make our stand here, where the ancestors watch. He turned to Maria. You understand what it will cost you to help us? The governor's wife straightened her spine. Every inch the Spanish aristocrat, even as she allied herself with those her husband called savages. I understand that some prices must be paid for justice. Augustine forgot that when he chose power over principle. They could hear the riders now, their approach echoing through the canyon's twisted passages. Thomas had chosen this spot carefully, a natural amphitheater where ancient petroglyphs witnessed the unfolding drama. The peace pipe had been smoked, here countless times before, marking treaties and truces between different peoples. Sarah moved to stand beside Thomas as Governor Rivera's voice carried up from below. We know you're there, Running Eagle. Surrender the woman, and perhaps the territory can show mercy to your people. Thomas raised the pipe to the four directions, honoring the old ways even in this moment of confrontation. Then he stepped forward, his voice pitched to carry. We will talk, Governor, but as equals, not as master and servant. There was a moment of confused silence below, then the sound of horses negotiating the narrow trail. Governor Rivera appeared first, his fine coat dusty from the journey, followed by Captain Harrison and a dozen armed men. Their weapons were ready, but uncertainty showed in their faces as they saw the tableau before them, their quarry not hiding, but waiting with dignity. Maria? The governor's voice cracked with disbelief at seeing his wife among the fugitives. What is the meaning of this? The meaning, mi amor, she said softly, is that it is time to remember who you were before the territory made you hard. Remember the man who spoke of justice, who believed in dignity for all peoples. Thomas held out the peace pipe. Your wife speaks wisdom, Governor. Here is a chance to show true strength, not in force, but in understanding. Rivera's hand strayed toward his pistol, but his eyes were fixed on the pipe. Sarah saw the conflict. In his face, the war between pride and possibility. She stepped forward, her teacher's instincts surfacing. Your Excellency, you once spoke of civilization. Show us now what that truly means, not dominance, but the wisdom to see beyond old battles. Captain Harrison shifted nervously. Sir, we have them surrounded. Say the word and no. Rivera's voice was quiet, but firm. Look around you, Captain. Look at where we are. The ancient petroglyphs seemed to watch them all, their weathered surfaces holding centuries of similar moments, conflict and resolution, pride and wisdom, the eternal dance of change and tradition. Maria moved to her husband's side, speaking softly in Spanish, words of memory and conscience, of the man she had married and believed in still. Thomas waited, the pipe extended, while Sarah felt the moonstone pendant pulse with anticipation. Finally, Rivera stepped forward. His next words would determine more than just their fates. They would show whether the territory could find a new way forward, whether the old wisdom carved in stone could speak to modern hearts. He reached for the peace pipe. The wedding blanket draped across Sarah's shoulders told two stories at once. Its base was traditional Apache weaving, rich with symbols of protection and harmony, but intertwined with patterns that spoke of her own heritage. New England stars, Boston roses, and sailing ships that had carried her family to American shores generations ago. Like the life she and Thomas were building, it was something entirely new, yet anchored in ancient wisdom. "Your grandmother's hands created beauty from contradiction," she said to Thomas as they stood together in the morning. Light. The canyon that had once been their sanctuary had become a gathering place, where two cultures met not in conflict, but in celebration. The changes had come gradually after that day with the peace pipe. Governor Rivera, perhaps reminded of his own lost idealism, had found a way to misplace the arrest warrant, to rewrite the story of Sarah's disappearance into something less confrontational. With Maria's careful guidance, he had even begun to reconsider his policies toward Apache education. The school had reopened, but differently now. Sarah and Thomas taught together, helping the children walk confidently in both worlds. The lessons included both English letters and Apache wisdom, mathematics alongside traditional star charts, written history balanced with oral traditions. "The blanket reminds me of your pendant," Thomas said, touching the moonstone that still hung at Sarah's throat. One stone, but catching light from many directions. Around them, their guests represented the new reality they had helped create. Elena and Miguel sat with tribal elders, sharing stories in a mixture of Spanish, English, and Apache. Little Fox, now one of their most promising students, was teaching Running Brook's younger siblings to write their names, while their grandmother looked on with cautious approval. Even Captain Harrison had come, though he stood awkwardly at the gatherings, Edge, still learning to see beyond his military training. The broken lantern from that night of false escape had been transformed into a teaching tool, showing students how light and shadow could tell different stories from different perspectives. "Some thought we were destroying the old ways," Thomas reflected, watching as an Apache medicine woman blessed their union using both traditional prayers and the Christian words Sarah had grown up with. They didn't understand that wisdom grows stronger when it's shared, like your friendship bracelet gaining strength from many threads. Sarah touched the bracelet she still wore, its knots now worn smooth with time. Elena had woven similar patterns into the wedding blanket, secret maps showing the path they had taken from conflict to reconciliation, from fear to understanding. The silver hair clip that Sarah had left behind in the governor's mansion had been returned to her by Maria. Rivera, transformed into a symbol of bridges built rather than barriers maintained. Now it held in place a crown of desert flowers, combining Boston propriety with Apache beauty. "The children ask me sometimes," Sarah said, watching as students played together, no longer separated by culture or custom, "if I miss my old life, my old certainties. I tell them that certainty is less valuable than understanding." Thomas nodded, his hand finding hers beneath the blanket's protective embrace. "The petroglyphs taught us that, how each generation adds its own truth to the unchanging stone, making the story richer without erasing what came before." The morning sun reached its full height, and the wedding blanket seemed to glow with all the colors of their shared future. It would hang in their home as both decoration and reminder, teaching their children that love could weave together separate traditions into something stronger than either alone. Governor Rivera had not attended the ceremony, but his absence felt more like respect than rejection. The territory was changing, slowly but surely, as people on all sides began to see through others' eyes. The star chart that had guided their escape now helped guide students through both Western astronomy and Apache sky wisdom. As the celebration continued around them, Sarah and Thomas stood wrapped in their wedding blanket, its woven stories embracing them like the land itself. They had found something their ancestors might not have imagined possible, a way to honor the past while building a new future, one thread at a time.